Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for bearing with us while we did the instant room change here. There was lunch in here about 10 minutes ago, for those of you who weren't here. So we're going to get started now. Thank you all for coming to this Friday afternoon after lunch session. I'm very excited about it. So I guess I would start by just saying, a little bit of the thinking behind this panel. So since I was the instigator for it, my title. So one of the things I started to notice is that recently there'd been a lot of shifting in positions in museums. Both people going from museum to museum, but also a large number of people who had held pretty significant digital lead positions in digital in museums for, in some cases, many, many years, leaving and then actually making a choice not to go, at least not to go immediately into another museum. And so I thought this was an interesting idea to get this group of people together to have this conversation. And part of it is that this whole thing is an ever-evolving, sort of moving target, because we actually have two people who, since the panel was formed, have actually started up again at museums. So I think that's an interesting thing that we'll talk about. And we also have the addition of Carolyn Royston, who was not on the original list, who is now independent. So I think this just sort of indicates this sort of shifting nature. But I think one of the things that we really wanted to do is look at this not only for the drivers of why this is all happening, but also what it means for the field at large. We were having this conversation earlier as, is this sort of a big do or die moment? Is this just the natural evolution of a field at this point in time? What are the kind of where are we in this process? And so that's sort of some of the things that we're going to unpack a little bit, to use Charlotte's expression, today over the course of the discussion. Now, we'd like this to be very interactive and engage with you all in a dialogue. So one of the things before we go into introductions is we'd like to start with just a little bit of getting a sense of who's in the audience. So how many people who are in the audience have been at your institution for, say, 2 years or less? Few new people. Okay. How many have been 5 years or more? Okay.
Super.
That's sort of even.
Dave, how many have been there 30 years or more?
The special Dave Patton Award. And how many of you are in a kind of management or upper management kind of position, a lead position? Okay, good number. Okay, great. No, thank you for that. So we're going to go through and do very quick introductions so that we can get into the heart of the matter. I guess I should start with myself. I'm Allegra Burnette. I'm I was about to say I'm the creative director of digital media. I'm the former creative director of digital media. I still get my pronouns very mixed up, too. So I was at MoMA for 12 years. I left this spring, and I started this summer as a principal analyst at Forrester Research. And I'll kind of go in, as the conversation unfolds, go into a little bit more about what that is, but part of it was, I think there's a really interesting time in the field of, just as museums are looking to outside people for expertise and to bring them in, there's also a really interesting time externally. So that's one of the things I'd like to talk about too, is what other the for-profit world can learn from museums. And so that was one of my motivations and interests in taking this role. And so what I do as an analyst is both research, writing, and short-term consulting for clients of all kinds of verticals, whether it's publishing, airlines, some nonprofits, banks, retail, all kinds of industries, actually, and it's a global company around the world. So that's a very short snapshot of what I do. We've posted both our current positions and our previous roles up here on the slide. I know I'm sitting in the way of Koven, so I will duck for a while and then come back on, but we will also make this available too. So without further ado, I think we'll just go through, and we're not quite sitting alphabetically, but we'll go through maybe alphabetically.
So I'm Erin Coburn. I'm an independent consultant working with museums on digital strategy at a high institutional level, and then also building digital media programs. I was formerly the Chief Officer of Digital Media at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I was there for about 2.5 years, and I was really brought into the Met as a change agent, and I very much went out there to help them build a digital media program. And for me, being a change agent had in my mind these very specific things that I wanted to accomplish there, and I very much wanted to see if we could build a program at the Met that really could succeed and be a model for how other museums embrace digital across an institution. So I had in my mindset when I went out there that I was going to be there for a specific period of time. Now, the Met didn't necessarily know that, but I went out there to actually accomplish something. And once we did, then I realized it would be fantastic if I could go and use some of this methodology and principles to help lots of different museums embrace digital. And so I decided to go into consulting so that now I get to work with lots of different museums. So even though I'm not in an institution, I have the great pleasure of working with multiple institutions.
Should we go in the order of the slides so people know? All right. Yeah, sure.
I'm Liz Neely. I probably left for a little different. I don't think anyone else at the table fell in love with someone in the mountains and moved there, but that I know of. But I worked at the Art Institute of Chicago for 17 years, so a long time. And basically, I think what we're going to get into is that there are a lot of different reasons for leaving, and part of it is being open and seeing how flexible what we learn in the jobs that we have is to give us the confidence to be open to moving forward and not being afraid. Risk, yay.
Me? I'm Carolyn Royston, and I was formerly head of digital at the Imperial War Museum in the UK. I was there for just over 5 years, and I left there, and similar, I think, to Erin, that I went in there as a change agent to establish a department, build up a digital program, and I got to a stage somewhere towards the end of last year where I felt like I had done that work and there was nowhere else for me to go in the organization. And so rather than get very frustrated and cross, I decided to move on. And now I am a consultant and have been that for a couple of years, and I hope to apply what I've learned over the last 15 odd years working in the cultural sector to help other organizations around their digital development and programs.
Okay. I'm Charlotte Sexton. I was the head of digital at the National Gallery in London for about 14 years. Perhaps unusually, I came up through the ranks, which is actually quite unusual in most museums. There isn't much of a career path. So my role changed sort of every few years and evolved. I achieved a lot there and produced some great stuff and had a great team of people working with me. But I guess I got to the point where I sort of ran out of steam, ran out of things to do that was really interesting or challenging. And I think, much like Carolyn, there was nowhere to go. I kind of was hitting my head off the ceiling. So I left last year and took a little break, which I think is really important when you've been in a role for a long time, just to give yourself some breathing space. And as of January, I considered most of this year to have been an R&D year, seeing what's involved in segueing into consultancy. And now coming up to the end of that first year, about to set up a new consulting firm with Carolyn. And, I think 20 years in the industry has shown me there's a great need for somebody who can help these organizations across the cultural sector, establish vision and really think about where they want to go in the future, and then, how to deliver it and the kind of staff support that they need to have in place. So I'm really excited about the future. I have had a great track record in the past, and I think there's lots of opportunities going forward.
Hi, I'm Dana Mitroff Silvers, and I was at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art for 11 years, running the web team, a really dated sounding title, head of online services. I ran all the production, design, research of the SF MoMA website. And while I was at SF MoMA, I had the opportunity to take a class at a place called the Stanford D School in this process called design thinking. And I was just very fortunate that I had a former SF MoMA colleague working there who said, I can get you in on a nonprofit price. And I went and did this class, and it was this transformative experience for me and introduced me to this process of human-centered design. It's basically user-centered, human-centered design and an innovation process. I was so excited about it, I brought it back to SF MoMA, and colleagues started calling me from other museums saying, hey, can you show us what this is about? Can you come teach it to us? And I thought, actually, this is what I want to do. And I left SF MoMA, it's coming up on 2 years, and now I work with museums around the country, many museums which are represented here, on introducing their staff to this process and applying it to both digital and analog projects. And I'm just really excited about this process. I blog about it on my blog, designthinkingformuseums.net. Anybody's using human-centered design in your organization, I'd love to interview you for my blog. So it's a little bit about who I am and what I do.
I'm Koven Smith. I'm the token dude on this panel, I guess. I was for 3 years the director of, this sounds so like depressing, I was the so-and-so. I was the director of technology at the Denver Art Museum for 3 years. I'm one of 2 people on this panel that is now back in museums. I was a consultant for about a year, and I'm now, as of Monday morning, the director of digital adaptation at the Blanton Museum of Art in beautiful Austin, Texas. And since I'm not a consultant, I'm not really pitching my services, so I just want to talk about whatever. Like, you guys don't have to hire me or anything, because I'm all done with that. Yeah, I mean, I think in somewhat similar, like what happened to me at the Denver Art Museum is over time the director of technology job just became a job that, frankly, I didn't want to do anymore, which sounds harsher than what I mean, in the sense that what the museum needed out of its director of technology was not necessarily the kind of thing that I love doing. And I just sort of reached a point where I said, you know, there's somebody out there, in fact, there's now somebody in this room who's better at this job than me, and I need to kind of find the thing that's right for me, which I did, actually, as it turns out, so.
Thank you. You know, and just to go back to, you know, it's an interesting thing when you're leaving a position that you've been in, you know, in my case for 12 years, and you know, in this role where, you know, there aren't too many like it out there, and you have to start to think, okay, well, you know, think very carefully about why I'm leaving, but also, you know, what's next. And, you know, I think for all of us, none of us, I mean, part of my interest in getting this panel together is, even though 2 have gone back to museums, nobody immediately went to back to a museum right after as the next step. And I think there's this interesting notion of stepping back from the field, which was part of what I was interested in doing. And so when I thought about, okay, well, after, you know, you've been creative director of digital media at MoMA, what do you do? Rather than coming up with a specific museum or a specific kind of job, I actually came up with a list of things I was interested in and things I was interested in learning about, and said, okay, well, is there a job out there for me that kind of matches this? And it actually just so happens I happened to be having lunch with my former boss, who is the CIO of MoMA, who's now the CIO of Forrester, and describing kind of all of the criteria of what my next job would be. And he said, well, have you ever thought about being an analyst? And I was like, I have no idea what that does, but tell me about it. And so that was the beginning of a conversation. And so, you know, I sort of tell that story for the point of, you know, you don't necessarily know what your next step is, but being kind of open to those opportunities, and certainly the network. And I think that's what, you know, this group is so great about, is creating a network that we can all kind of learn from. So I don't know if that's something that anybody wants to pick up on as, you know, a story. I mean, I think part of what's interesting about going on to that consulting role is that you're building on the space of a network, and in your case, going from setting up this kind of change in terms of organizational structure, and then thinking about it for other institutions. And so, anybody who's thinking about making a change too, this is a great group, at MCN and other conferences to start to get a little bit at what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But maybe if anybody can chime in on that. But I'm curious about the two of you who have gone back to museums. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why did you decide to go back, and what was it about that particular museum that made you want to kind of get back into it?
Well, I think one thing on what you said before is that, and I hope our experience, I think what we want to help everyone think is that there's a lot of different experiences, and what I heard from a lot of us is that that you get to a point where you always have to be really aware of what's interesting to you at any time. And in my case, if it was that I needed to be in a different place, or if we're hitting up against walls, or it's just being aware and knowing that there are these opportunities, because we have, and I think that a lot of us hit those spots too, because as technologists, everything is always changing, and a lot of us are actually craving that. So I just started back at a museum, at the Harwood Museum, and I went back to, I didn't do consulting in the meantime. I did the climbing in the mountain in the meantime until the money ran out. Everyone has their own story, right? Everyone. So I went back to a museum because it was a very different museum than the Art Institute, which is a very large museum, and it's one that's dedicated to the art of the community. So I went to it because I wanted to be part of the community, and I thought that would actually embed me in this new community more than consulting would. But I will say, that actually it's been a challenge, because when we work in large museums, we're used to like a million things happening at once, and I actually really love that. And so it's interesting to kind of, I think that the other thing we always have to do is, if we move into these transitions, be very open to what's working and what's not working. There are things I love about being back in a small place, but now I'm actually doing other things on the side because it doesn't have enough happening all the time. So it's always a process, and I think that those of us in technology are willing to move and really don't like to be bored. So that's my ongoing journey.
Wow. Okay. No, that's awesome. I just don't know how to follow that. Similar to Liz, I didn't spend a year climbing mountains, but I did spend a year going to the playground with my son every morning. And frankly, that was, I think a big part of me leaving the institution that I had been at, which is not an easy decision to make by any means. And I think had I still been a single guy, I would have stayed there a lot longer, probably. But at that point, I was like, he's 1 year old and I'm barely seeing him. Let's go to the playground. So, so being a consultant was not necessarily like a career goal of mine, but it did afford me the ability to do two things. One is go to the playground, which was humongous. And two is that it allowed me to really take the time to say, if I am going to go back into a museum, I'm going to do that on very specific terms, and one thing that was really wonderful about the Blanton Museum of Art is I consulted with them first. And so, I've talked to several people at this conference about it, and I sort of joked that it was sort of a rent-to-own situation. Like, I was sort of trying them out, and they were trying me out to see if it was the right fit. And, I think if it had just been like me applying for that job, it would not have worked the same way. That would have been a very different scenario. And being able to sort of like get there and sit in their meetings and talk to the staff and really get to know everyone really convinced me that it's like, yes, this is the right situation, the right way for me to go. What was your question?
it was really looking at, how do you, what was it about that institution in particular that brought you back into the museum world? I think it's interesting too how both of you, it's about sort of shifting scales and looking at doing something that is different from what you were doing before in whatever. And I think if you look all the way down the row here, it's building on what you've done, but sort of pivoting a little bit and thinking about how to kind of go beyond and build on that experience. Yes, please.
So this is just a comment on Koven, on your position. I think it's fantastic that you've gone to the Blanton Museum, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of people who have left large institutions are now going to smaller size ones. And I don't know if that's really a trend, but it's something that I've picked up on lately, and I think it's fantastic, actually, that this is happening. I mean, I think about Koven, who is going to a museum that has 70 people. Koven and I work together at the Metropolitan Museum in digital media. That department now, that digital media department at the Met, is around 70 people. I mean, it's incredible when you think about the difference of scale there, but I also just think about what wonderful potential to see what Koven is going to do at a university museum. And I think it's, and same thing with you, Liz, going to where you are, and it's the same thing with Nancy Proctor leaving the Smithsonian and going to Baltimore, and Scott Sayre going to work for the Corning Museum of Glass. I mean, it's just, I feel like that's a very exciting trend that I'm seeing happening.
And I think, maybe what we could talk about now a little bit is what these shifts and changes at the roles that we have had, the opportunities perhaps that it opens up for, other people in the institution. For example, I know that with my department, what happened is two people who reported to me actually got promoted into managing the department and into positions that really, are going to stretch them and they're so far doing a fabulous job, which is completely to be expected. But what's nice is that it really gives them an opportunity to grow and develop in a way that, just makes me very proud. But I think, thinking about these changes in that way of, well, what does it mean for the new generation of museum professionals coming in, as well as those who have been kind of working for a while, but not necessarily at that management level position.
I mean, for me, I had a really great deputy, and when I realised that I wanted to go, I recommended him for the position because there was going to be that continuity. But what I recognised was a very, very different character to me. He's a very calm person, a very calm and considered person. Not that kind of, I'm going to power through no matter what. Which is, I felt I had to apply that kind of energy for the time that I was there in that job because I was forging away for the digital media department, and I felt like that time had come to an end. And now actually what the museum needed was a much calmer, kind of, much more considered type of approach to consolidate what we'd done, and to continue that work. So for me, it felt like a really nice progression, and me leaving, it felt like it was the right thing to do.
I think that also ties into this idea of coaching and mentorship as well. And, maybe Charlotte and Erin in particular, I think, have some insight into that as well.
Yeah.
I think I know what this is about. Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe I'll speak to that. I'll start and you chime in. I'm actually quite passionate about coaching as a way of maybe developing clarity where there is slight confusion. And I think, I don't know about the States, but I know in the UK that the kind of relationships you have with staff and managers is quite a particular one. And sometimes it's not the most insightful when you want to try and consider what are you good at, what are you not so good at, what is your full potential, because most of the management approach there is really about, it's quite transactional. Here's a list of stuff you've got to do, and then you do it, and you either do it or you don't. And actually, I wanted to step back. I was very lucky. I had an opportunity to do some leadership training when I was about 5 years into the job, and that really transformed my view of the world, actually. And I think it really made me think about my potential going forward. But I think when you've been somewhere for a while and you kind of have it in the back of your mind that you want to make a change, but you're very unclear about what that change is, I think the opportunity to have quite frank and honest discussion with a coach who's not trying to be your friend, but they are very good at kind of reflecting back to you some of the things that are sort of swilling around in your mind. And I do a lot of my thinking out loud, so actually that dialogue for me was really, really important. And then in between those sessions, time to reflect. And actually where I am now is a direct result of having the space to have that process happen. And I was very, very lucky to get teamed up with a guy that was training to be a coach. So I feel very lucky that I kind of had that opportunity to work with somebody who's actually incredibly good, and for very little money, basically. And I think the lessons I learned from that has really been the cloak around, that I've put on to forge a new career. And to be brave enough to do that. Because in some ways, the easier option by a mile would have been go and get another job. But the one thing I knew when I left, and I'm going to use a rude word, so I do apologize if that's, put your fingers in your ears. The one and only thing I knew when I came out of that role was I did not want to do the same shit somewhere else. That was the only thing I knew. So that was my start point, and that's why this year has been so interesting, because I've just been very open to change, and I think that makes you brave, and it makes lots of interesting opportunities come your way, plus a really good network.
So my experience with coaching it's a little bit different, but I applaud all forms of coaching. When I was building the digital media department at the Met, I was hiring a lot of people and centralizing a lot of people into one department. And it was very important as I was promoting people up within this department that we found ways to collaborate, and people were assuming new responsibilities and they were working in different ways. And so I had told the Met that I thought it was very important that we bring in a coach to help not only me with this in assuming this new role, but also my senior managers with the roles that they were now assuming, and then how we work across together as a senior leadership team within digital media. And some people at first, like you think coach and you think, did I do something wrong? Like, am I in trouble? Do I need help in a certain area? And I really had to get across that it's such a fantastic opportunity to be able to have someone come in and help you think about where you're at professionally and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are and what it means to pull us together into a stronger unit who's really working as a team. And it was a fantastic experience for us individually, and I think for us as a team. And so it's something that I highly encourage. If it's something that you can do within your institution, it's a great form of professional development and reflection. And I think, for me, it wasn't about getting clarity that I wanted to go on to be a consultant. To me, it was very much about a tool to help us be a stronger department.
Yeah, sure. I was say, if you work at an institution that won't pay for a coach or doesn't have the budget for something like that, one of the things that you might consider is informational interviews or just having coffee with smart colleagues. And that's something I did when I knew I was thinking I was probably going to be leaving SF MoMA. So I started having coffee with people, not just my museum colleagues, but people outside the museum field, to just kind of open my mind up to other career possibilities. So an example is I take improv theater classes. I had coffee with my improv teacher, and that opened me up to this whole world. She does corporate training using improv. I didn't even know that job existed.
Yeah,
it's
true, actually.
It's just like getting my brain to think beyond the museum world and start seeing other kinds of careers and possibilities. And I mentioned the Stanford D School. I went and I had lunch with people who worked there to understand what they were doing and where the parallels were between what I did and what was different. So if you can't afford a coach, look around the room at all the really smart people here that you can have a 15-minute coffee with, and reach out to people in your network as a way that I was able to get myself mentally thinking what my next step was going to be.
Right. And I think, in the conversation that we had together prior to this, I think and it's been picked up a little bit in the conversation so far, one of the things that I think several of us notice is that, when you get to the point of being willing to move on and starting to think about, kind of exploration and what the next step is and sort of, I guess, releasing it a little bit, then suddenly, there's a sort of funny effect of, in a way, your current job becomes easier and more fun and more manageable because you've sort of, it's almost like you've taken the risk and the stress out of it and sort of, freed yourself from it. So, what I would encourage those of you who are planning to stay in your job is to try and have that mentality while you're still there, because, there was something very nice about like getting to that point of feeling, wow, this is kind of a great way to approach your job, because you suddenly, things that seemed very important before seem much less so.
You'll be more willing to take risks. And I knew for a year personally that what I was working towards, and it makes it a lot easier to just really push towards getting things done, and then you find out, wow, actually that's a really good way to operate. It is just a job. So you want to do if you do the things that you love and you have passion for and you do them, it's probably going to make a difference for everyone around you.
And I think one other thing that I'd like to emphasize that we don't talk a lot about around here, which is I think particularly at like sort of mid-sized museums, particularly with digital staffs where you're just fighting for every dollar that you can get. Typically the staff that you get are going to be like fresh out of college, or they started as interns or remaining interns, or and so often as the head of a department like that, you are in a position of being the only person with any real seasoning that all those people are reporting to. So from my perspective, it's just like every day is like every meeting we have, I'm mentoring in a way. And that's kind of a huge cognitive load to take on, where you're like, we have to address the business at hand, but I also have to sort of like model behavior that I think, you should be picking up on. And I think that's something that those of us who have headed departments at, as I say, mid-sized institutions and smaller really have to be conscious of in a way that's difficult. So we're getting maybe a little further afield.
Bring this down a little bit. I just am struck by all of this change, and I'm wondering, in a larger sense, is this a moment in the general museum technology field? Has something shifted that caused all this change, or has something not shifted that you wish it had, and so you made the shift in your own lives? Yes. And I don't know how to phrase it, but if you guys have some thoughts on that, it'd be great.
We do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we can talk about a few different factors. I think, in the panel yesterday, Charlotte talked a little bit about, and Carolyn, about some of the British, the economic situation and sort of what's happening there. But I also think, when you have been in this position for a long time and in this role, like for me, it's also, you kind of come against this, okay, well, I'm looking forward to another redesign of the website, and I've done 2 of those. I'm looking forward to another building project that's starting, and I've done 1 of those. And so, it becomes, this catalyst. And I think a lot of us, especially who have been in the field for a while, we all kind of came in and built these websites and grew these departments and these programs. And you're sort of at that point of, okay, well, what's next with the program, but also what can I do that is different for me personally? And so, for me, taking that step away from the field is actually about, looking at kind of the experience I have and the skill set I have and saying, okay, well, what else should I bring to my toolkit that I don't currently feel like I have, that even if I come back to the museum in, a year, 2 year, 5 year, whatever, that will make it that much stronger. And so, what's interesting is these different, if you hear this, the reasons for all of us, in some respects, they're very different, but they're all a lot of them are happening within the same period of time. But maybe I could turn that over to.
Sorry, was somebody else about to jump in? Carolyn, that's enough out of you.
Thank you.
No, sorry, Carolyn and I have this thing. One thing I do want to say, though, is I think sort of technology/digital people amongst museum staffs are somewhat unique in that I think we're far more focused on how the work we do transforms how the museum operates or how museums broadly and generally operate. Like, I feel like we have a consciousness about movement in the sector that not a lot of other museum constituencies have, and maybe that's overstating the case. But I certainly know for me, and it seems like for a lot of us on the panel, like some of it is, where can I help to change the whole field? Like, where can I be most effective in doing that? And in my case, it was like, I want to be at a museum where I can really like do a lot of the things that I've been talking about for years and model that behavior. And like for Erin, it's working with a lot of museums to really think more kind of responsibly about their digital efforts. And so, I think if there's a broader movement or a broader trend, I think that might be some of it, is a lot of us are reaching a point where it's like, yeah, I can do another website redesign, or I can be in a position to like really change kind of everything,
I think for me as well, I was moving too fast for my museum, in terms of my own personal development, and I didn't know that when I went in there 5 years ago. It was a new job for me. I hadn't run a department before, so it was new and it was exciting, and I was making things happen, and they, to their credit, were getting out of my way and letting me do it. But as I was doing that and kind of developing my management skills and my interest in where digital fit as a kind of as part of that organizational structure, and starting to have those ideas and around real change and how digital was driving that, the rest of the organization was way behind me, and even when I talked about it, and I did sit on the senior management team, so I did have the opportunity to have a voice there. They didn't really want to hear what I was saying, and they didn't really understand, and I just became frustrated by that, because actually it felt like it was stunting my growth. And so when I actually resigned, my director, who I liked very much, he said to me, we're really sorry you're going, but there's nothing I can offer you. There's nothing I can do. Wow. There's nowhere for you to go. And so when you hear something like that, and you're, and I'm a person that just wants to keep moving forward all the time, it is time to be creative and think about something else. Rather than sit. I could have sat there. I could have stayed in that job. No one made me leave, and I could have stayed there probably till the end of my career. So, there's a personal aspect to this. There's a personality aspect. That's part of who I am, and I think the skill is recognizing that tipping point when do I stay or do I go?
I think that's such an interesting thing about. We were talking earlier about kind of characteristics. About a group of people who are maybe very comfortable with change. They're disruptive. They don't want the status quo, and that's. I think that's quite empowering, actually. And I know when I came out of my job, and I had enjoyed much of it, absolutely, but also recognizing actually, and I hadn't fully appreciated that while I was there, but afterwards I just realized how bored I was, and that wasn't because they weren't doing interesting things or anything else. This was entirely my problem. I was bored because I was bored. And actually, I'm not a fantastic risk taker at all. I make calculated risks. I take calculated risks. And what I felt, and I came in from a freelance background, so it's not like I hadn't understood what it was to be independent. But I just see at the moment that where I am in my life and in my own kind of career path, sometimes you need to re-energize yourself. I mean, when you bore yourself, then you really know you've got a problem. And that's, it's not my personality. I don't want to be that person whinging in the corner at all. So in fact, I think it was a good thing I stepped back, and it has made new opportunities within the organization. Absolutely. They've restructured, they've brought in, one of those kind of, we talked about this yesterday, the digital superhero, the person on more wages at a higher grade who has a much broader responsibility and a lot of revenue generation as part of that. But it's also made a lot of opportunities, speaking to Allegra, for people who were lower down in the team. They had other kind of functions. And it's a bit like cutting trees down in the forest. It's allowed new seedlings to come up, and I think that's really healthy. And yeah, new opportunities are always a good thing.
So I wonder if what you two have just talked about moving more quickly than your organization, and that's how you get to the spot. I wonder if that's a trend. Are there people out there that feel that way, that you've seen? Yeah.
Yeah. I want to respond to that. When I started doing this design thinking, it was definitely not, I would say, embraced in my organization, because I'm trying to push museums to change, and there's resistance and hostility around that. And I encountered that internally, and I encountered that in the work I'm doing. But for some crazy reason, I keep forging ahead because I'm really passionate about it. But I always knew internally that I was trying to push a little more than the organization was ready. And I feel like I pushed enough internally, and then I thought I'm going to go out and work with other museums. And the one thing that people probably know is when you leave your own organization, other people will listen to you. And now, 2 years later, I'm going back to consult with my former organization, because I think after 2 years, they might start listening to me now, maybe. I'm not sure, we'll find out. But it's funny, when you're inside, it's hard to get people to listen to you. And sometimes you have to leave and then come back.
Yeah, and I'm curious about those of you who are consultants now or have been, because a lot of people, have been transitioning into consultancy for museums. I mean, if you look at the panel, I'm the only one who's no longer specifically within a museum context. And so, my question to you is there some limit to how many of us can become museum consultants, or what happens? What's the saturation point?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I think it's okay.
Well, obviously we share a number of skills, and backgrounds aren't terribly dissimilar. Well, I'll turn that one on its head, because actually I see a much wider opportunity. And I'm so grateful that I bumbled into digital, N years ago, completely unplanned, because actually it's so totally transferable. It's a museum, it's performing arts, it's a commercial thing. So actually, if you were going to make a change, making a change with these skill sets is really a great thing. So for me, I'm not too worried about the museum sector per se. I think that's just one slice of the pie. And actually, I'm on the board of a non-profit organisation in the UK that's all about the Dance UK. And so actually, I'm there because of my digital background. And I've had clients all through this year from libraries and archives, from museums, from performing arts. So I'm really optimistic that I don't see it as competition. I don't think we're cannibalizing each other's potential client base. I actually think it's a much broader field, much broader world. And actually it's very symbiotic. You feed off, of good practice.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, what I've been seeing out there in the field is that museums are really quite grateful to know now who to go to amongst a variety of us, and some who aren't even in the room, for help in this area. Because I think a lot of museums, and a lot of the requests that I get from museums is also coming from senior leadership, or from a director, or from a president. So it's not necessarily my colleagues in digital media. And what I'm noticing is that a lot of museums now realize that they can't fall behind in this area. It's too important. And they want to know, what can they do to make themselves relevant with digital? What can they do to position themselves internally to be able to have a scalable and sustainable digital program that is run efficiently, where they're allocating their resources wisely, and where they're setting themselves up to truly support all aspects of their institution and serving their mission. It's across the board. Seems to be so much demand for museums to have help in this area. So I think for me, that's very promising. And I also think that it's so critical, especially because of how fast technology is changing and how important it has become in other sectors. So if we as museums don't think about how we can actually keep up with technology and use it in good ways, we're going to lose our own staff to other sectors. And we talked about that a little bit this morning when we got together about, we used to say, you come to work for museums not only because you love the arts, but because it provides a really great quality of life. And then now you hear, companies like Twitter and Google and talking about all of the ways in which they foster innovation and creativity and their work life that they have. And that's going to start competing with the people who we have in our digital programs, especially because of the pay difference. So, John.
So I'll just play the other side of that is having worked in a federal institution for 15 years. I think that people want to move forward, and there is internal desire to keep up. On the other hand, they are nervous and they need the external validation of the consultant. And so a lot of times it really helps to bring in that outside voice. I refer to our relationship with Erin as renting credibility.
But I guess I would ask the question: is there a way to do that before we leave an institution? Or is that yesterday's panel?
Well, or how do you? How do you feel having to rent credibility, John?
Yeah.
I'm just playing devil's advocate. Does everyone in this room feel like if someone tells you that you're in a senior role and that you need to get validation from someone else, do you feel okay? I'm not going to be. Believe me, this is not me being defensive. I should just say that as a consultant, one of the great joys that I have is being able to advocate on behalf of staff and bring them to the recognition of senior leadership who for various reasons may not have recognized how valuable they are before. So a lot of what I think my role is not to go into a museum and say, here's what I think that you should have to do because I have this expertise, because every institution is different. So I don't believe that there's this formulaic approach of which you go in and say, here's what you have to do. Instead, what the role that I think that I serve is actually giving digital staff a much larger platform in which they can operate within their institution. And I definitely wasn't going against that. I guess I was trying to get at the question on if respect is an issue in some of these situations and how we get around that with, especially for those of us in institutions for a long time. If that's one way to get, if that's an issue, I don't know if it is.
Well,
Sure. Oh, yes, Seth.
and I would actually almost sort of reframe that a little bit, which is, are there other areas of the museum where a comparable thing like this happens? Do conservators bring in outside conservation consultants to validate proposals that they've made?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll shut up on that.
I would.
But I just, that comes from, and I think I said this yesterday, not throwing class trash around, but certainly as technology people, I think we've often found ourselves in a position where other opinions are somewhat more overvalued than our own, even on areas in which people are not subject matter experts. And so, I don't know. And some of this comes out of suddenly being a consultant and being in the position of being that guy that's coming in to validate, and frankly not being comfortable with that position. Being you've got brilliant people here, just listen to them. The problem solved.
Well, and it's interesting too because it actually is not probably not a surprise that this is not just a museum field thing that happens. I mean, in fact, Forrester, where I'm working now, a lot of what the research, the way that the research and the papers that come out of that research is used is by different companies to validate or, decisions that they're thinking about making, or, by teams to say, look, here's this analyst who went and did 20 interviews and they did the survey with, 5,000 people, and this is what they said, and to use it to sort of back up an argument. And so, in fact, a lot of what I'm doing now, more broadly than just the museum sector, but certainly applies there as well, is exactly that, of saying, okay, here's all this stuff that's happening. How can we consolidate it in a way that can be used to make that argument and support it? So in fact, that senior leadership is making decisions based on real facts and data rather than just, I think this is the right way to do it.
I've been working in a museum for 17 years, and it was my second career. I was a college teacher for 23 years before, and even though I knew that it was going to be a very different playing field, I simply wasn't prepared for for that very big difference that happened. But aside from that, one of the things, on numerous occasions over those 17 years, I've thought about leaving. I spent 23 years sort of on my own. I was an itinerant for most of that time. I'm an itinerant teacher, so in a way I was consulting, and there were positives and negatives to that, but the negatives were security, et cetera. So I often thought of moving on, but then I started to think that museums are simply organizations, and every organization has, its issues. And as you've been saying, that happens. But then something really strange happened. I got old. I just turned 65, and I realized that, I have some value. I mean, just to myself, and it's changed my attitude. So, whereas very early on, I would have, I wanted the respect, I wanted the validation. Now it's less important, and it's much easier for me to look at what other people's needs are. So I just want to say that. So turn old, that's a good slogan.
We all are, every day.
From a pure business perspective, how did you navigate those waters once you decided to go independent? I don't think any of you have MBAs, but what do I charge? How much free stuff do I do? Sorry, Liz. When do I do something on spec? How did you navigate those waters when you decided to go solo?
I have an MBA. That actually was one of the hardest. That was one of the hardest parts for me. I mean, and I studied business in school, but that was one of the hardest things for me, was to figure out all of that. Like, do you incorporate yourself? How do you charge? How do you do your taxes? I mean, just so many things that I had no idea. And this is where this network is invaluable. It was through my colleagues that I figured out how to do that. I just picked up the phone and to consultants who I knew already in our field and said, I don't know what to charge, and I don't know what my rate should be, and I'm not even quite sure how to structure my day or put myself out there. And honestly, I cannot say how in debt I am to the generosity of this community to help me figure that out and figure it out quickly. So that's how I learned, was from our colleagues.
I have to +1 that for sure. I think the first thing I did was I called Bruce Wyman and I called Kate Haley Goldman. And when I talked to both of them, they're like, well, when we talked to Erin about this. So yeah, totally. This community was invaluable.
We're setting the marketplace standard. Is that what's happening?
I sadly didn't do business. I did political science with a focus on Marxist feminism. So I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. But that was a real, that was a real fear. And one of the reasons that Charlotte and I are going to be working together is because we want to be able to give each other that kind of support, and kind of, supplement where our different skills where we can help each other.
In a funny kind of way, I spent the last couple of years at the gallery trying to cultivate a business mind because I felt there was opportunity to do that. And also in the UK with the credit crunch, museums were really having kind of quite a violent shift in trying to think about how to be economically viable. And I don't know about you guys, but, seeing a lot of curators trying to think like business people is pretty funny. Actually, I'm very interested in business. I don't have that background, but I'm trying to learn very quickly, and I'm getting a lot of support in that process. And actually, I think much of the last few months has been about trying to articulate what is the business, and then actually the mechanics of setting it up. I think are relatively straightforward. I'll let you know next year. But I actually think that's really exciting. That's using another bit of my brain that had been, underutilized. I think that's quite exciting, as well as delivering whatever the offer itself.
I have to say, I made millions of mistakes. Like, I screwed up plenty, and I just am learning as I go along. And I should have called Bruce, and I should have called Kate, and I didn't. And I've been, that might have saved me some time. I made a lot of mistakes. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So you guys will look up their names, They'll start a Google Doc.
Oh, no, I had millions of dollars. No, millions of mistakes. And just I'm learning and also just trying and failing and picking up and trying again and
you're
just
iterating.
We're doing what we said we should do.
Iterating and embracing failure and going, oh, well, I'm going to keep trying. I mean, it's all worked out, but I wouldn't say it's been smooth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
All right, I have two questions, but I'll put them together so you guys can answer them any way you want. One is, because I've been on both sides, so is there something now that you're all consultants that you wish you knew when you did work in the museum, so that all of us who are in the museum can take experience of that? And the other thing is, because I have been a consultant, I'm called all the time, and people ask, museum people share all the time, and they're about to do certain projects, and some are infrastructure, and some are strategies, and they ask you, what did you do? How are you doing it? And then they always say, oh, can you come help us? And I said, no, we have a full-time job. And I was thinking, why don't you guys have a website or something that says what your skill sets are, so I can just send that and says what your real focus is, because right up here you all have different
when I get home
but together like a consortium of areas that people who are really know technical can do a needs assessment, people who really can help us rise, people who can help on an app project, because you're all very different, but I'm asked all the time, and plus we need things all the time. I would take your resources and sort of put them together.
I think that's a really interesting thing, because for me it's not about competition. I think it's very symbiotic, because I think, and we were talking about this when we were thinking about the business, that I'm very interested in strategic partnerships and these kind of symbiotic, supportive relationships, because I think when one wins, kind of we all win. Because the end goal is you want to make it better somehow and get paid along the way.
And I'm also, quite selfishly interested in blurring this distinction between the museum field and other fields, because I think we're both, learning from each other so much. And, I was a little upset because a lot of people were like, oh, I'm really surprised to see you here at the conference. And I was like, well, I didn't suddenly stop caring about museums, and I didn't stop wanting to, help museums just because I love MoMA. And so, I'd also like us to think about how we can not just be, as much as I adore and want to be a part of this community continuing forward, but not to just be trapped by that, but to leverage that and think about that in different ways. And because I think that will also open up new opportunities for everybody in the museum field and vice versa.
But I see it as an extended family, and that's quite a powerful network. And I still keep in contact with people I've worked with in the past who maybe have jumped field. Those connections, those interconnections are incredibly powerful. And that's why this kind of conference and this kind of social get-together, if you like, is actually really, really, really important in obvious ways and much less obvious ways. And that's why I would always kind of really advocate for that connectivity. I think is very powerful.
But I still want to know, is there something you wish you knew when you were still at the museum? And the final question will also be, are you making a whole lot more money?
Yeah, millions.
That's 3 questions.
Something we knew.
So this doesn't exactly answer the question, but it's one of the things that I think I've recognized more now being a consultant about the way that I worked prior when I was in an institution, and that's how much I enjoy the way that I spend my day. And I'm not saying that I think now everyone should work at home, but I'm incredibly productive in a day. It's quite shocking how much I get done, and I'm so surprised at how much I can do in a day versus what I did when I was in an institution where you're constantly in meetings, and it's so hard to actually sit down and produce something or to generate great ideas. And I spend a good portion of my day working in a cafe that's a work cafe surrounded by about 40 people, all on laptops, all on community tables, where some people are drawing together, some people are drawing and sketching things out, other people are having meetings, other people are on Skype, and you're all just in this space doing it. And it feels really exhilarating to me to be in that kind of atmosphere. And it's something that I think about a lot, that if I were to go back into an institution, how could I bring some of that back into the way that we work in an institution where it just feels so divided? Or we're a very creative community, and yet the ways that we spend our day within an institution, I think sometimes is so destructive to actually have good creativity. So it's just one of the things that I've recognized now in terms of thinking about both how productive I am and how much I enjoy the way in which I spend my day working.
Can I just add one thing that really stood out for me yesterday with Lance Wheeler in the after discussion on the keynote? He said something that just completely chimed with me, which was about that, you know, most of these kind of museum cultural organizations, they're still clinging to 20th century processes. And here we are in the 21st century, and, you know, you couldn't even get a dispensation to work from home, you know, for a day just to get that report written or whatever. And that kind of organizational inflexibility seems like quite a Luddite approach to things, because it's sort of disrespectful of staff, because it kind of assumes you just want to shirk off and, you know, like, you know, I'm working from home. And actually,
right.
You know, that's rubbish. As you say, you can be much more productive. But that kind of fixed structure, I think, is very limiting for these organizations. And I worry going forward that actually these are things that keep them behind the curve. Because if they liberate themselves from those, I think, imagine what you could achieve with the same kind of energy and drive, you know, with just making some tweaks. And business has to do this all the time so that they're on the front foot.
And to maybe more also directly answer your question, I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is, and I realize what happened because it was the nature of where the museum was and where digital was when I started, which is that in order to get what we got done, we did a lot of it under the radar. You know, there was not a lot, you know, let's quietly get it done over here and then we can keep moving forward. But in the meantime, what we were doing and the importance of it was growing and growing. And in reflection of looking back, what I realized is I did a very good job, I think, of advocating to colleagues, and both inside and outside of the museum, but not as good a job advocating up. And so there, you know, this also touches on some of the conversation from yesterday's panel of, you know, having the senior staff awareness of what was actually taking place and what we were doing, and moving away from that sort of skunk works to, you know, kind of coming out to the light and shining a light on, you know, what it is that we were doing. And I think that in retrospect, I know why I sort of went the way that we did in terms of keeping things under the radar, and we wouldn't have gotten many things done that we got done without doing that. But at some point you have to be willing to kind of step out from behind the curtain and say, you know, this is what the team is doing, this is what we're capable, and help us figure out what the next step is, rather than waiting for them to kind of have an influence on us. So.
Hey there. This is a little bit of a depressing panel, I'm going to say. Now I'm not sure if I was...
We want to inspire
So, and I'm not saying, maybe this isn't the best panel for me to come to because I'm under 2 years, right? So I'll say that out front. I never anticipated going into museums.
But what part's depressing? I'm actually curious to know what's...
So I work at the Smithsonian, right? And last January, which was a little bit after I came in, we saw the loss of Nancy Proctor. We saw the loss of a couple of other people like Georgina Goodlander and a number of other people who were really trying to push the boundaries. And when you kind of talk internally, not just internally at Smithsonian, but with museum folks, it's like, well, yeah, that's what happens with people who are trying to push the boundaries. So that's kind of a scary assumption for somebody who's coming into a field. I never anticipated going into museums and never really had much of an interest. I wanted to work in government, and that's where I worked before in state government as doing attorney stuff, actually. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go into government is because I would look at Washington, D.C. and say, I can do that better. So I think that I can make a real contribution. And so it sounds like these people, like when they're in these positions, when you're in your positions, you have all of this frustration. But I kind of wonder if in the back of your mind, in some ways that's a good thing because that means that you're the right person for this job. If it wasn't you, it would be somebody else doing a worse job. And so my question, I guess, is do you have any regrets about the people and the places that you leave behind, about the visitor experiences, which are going to be less because you have left? Or more to Koven's point, do you feel like you're pushing the needle more by being an independent consultant and trying to navigate outside of that sphere?
I mean, I think that the good news is that all those people going outside to, have an influence on these institutions from that consulting point of view actually, helps for people who are, kind of coming into these roles to be able to make those changes more in a sense. It's a little bit of that frontier, because if you think about what digital was when many of us started at our institutions, like, ours was flat HTML pages and, no online collection. And so there was a whole building up of a thing there. And now it's like, the optimist and the side of me that's looking at this as, feeling very positive about it is in fact that now there's this expertise that's sort of, shaping around these institutions in a way that has never existed before, and being able to say, we've been there, we've done that, we've built that. Now we can recognize the new talent that's coming in, and we're now in an outside position to be able to help you learn about how to recognize that talent. So I actually think it's, for somebody who's coming into the field, really exciting that we're all kind of leaving and telling museums what to do from the outside, because they kind of need it. And, we knocked ourselves, like, our heads against the wall trying to do it internally, but in many ways, I think it's going to be, we'll have more success doing it externally for the next generation.
I just want to follow up and say, I don't think I could not do what I do now if I hadn't been inside a museum for so long, because I've been there and I've done it and I've fought the battles, and I owe everything to my former institution, all my skills and all my work habits, like Erin's talking about, my diligence and like sticking to it and being organized. It's all learned on the job, and I have absolutely no regrets for doing it as long as I did. And now I feel really lucky that I get to work with so many different kinds of museums. Also what Erin was talking about, I get to have an impact on the visitor experience in many different types of institutions, art museums, science museums, and that's really cool. And I feel like I'm having an impact. I also do consulting with some technology companies because they pay well and I enjoy it. And I take what I learned from outside the sector and now I bring it into my museum consulting jobs. So I feel like I'm enriching what's happening in the museum world by taking things I see in different tech companies I work with and bringing them back to the sector. So I feel like it's a system that ultimately benefits the field.
And I really don't want anyone to, I mean, that's definitely, I don't think we wanted a depressing tone to this, because I think, I think anyone that's in this room is working in digital or technology in a museum. You're not the kind of person that takes the easy way out anyway. So, life is not going to be easy. And there are going to be times that you look at it and you realize you're not in the right place. And I think that what I hope that we're all getting across is that flexibility, that these roles in museums where digital is really the center and touching a lot of things, and we work with institutions that really like a high level of quality, that is actually giving you so many routes in so many directions. And if you think about like the business sector or other sectors, 17 years is a long time. 11 years is a long time. So there really isn't, I think maybe in the past someone would stay in a museum for their whole life, but that's just not the way jobs and careers works anyway. So I think that actually it's it's not because it's always easy. There are issues, but everyone here knows that. That's why we come together twice or 3 times a year and talk about it. So, but I think that ultimately it leads to what we want to get across is that you go through, there are harder times, there are hard times when you're in the institution, when you're not in the institution, when you change, but that there are a lot of opportunities, and hopefully by having the network and by being able to look at things from a lot of different directions as technologists can, we can actually help the field, help ourselves in many different interesting ways.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also emphasize too that I think it's certainly, at least for me personally, like when I moved from the Met to the Denver Art Museum, I mean, it was a move from one museum to another, but it was also a move from not being a manager to being very much a manager, or at least kind of a manager to like really being a manager. And that's a really critical transition in the sense that, I think at the Met, I always had absolute confidence in my ability to just like be hardcore and like push through whatever project it was, because my project was whatever that thing was. And as soon as I got to the art museum, the Denver Art Museum, my project became the museum. And that's a very different kind of perspective. So it's like, if it's a little depressing, it's because like for me, I got to that museum and said, I'm not sure that I'm the right person to do this project, the project being the museum. And that was sort of a hard, very difficult realization to come to. But at the same time, I saw people underneath me and elsewhere in the organization that were in the same position that I was at the Met, where it's like they're hardcore and they're pushing projects through and it's happening. And I think for all of us at this table who were in museums in the really dark days of technology and digital, like I'm going to say that it's thriving now. Just like the amount of stuff that's going on right now is incredible relative to. It's like, I remember our conversations at the Met when I first got there, where it's like, it took us like 2 years of arguments before finally somebody said, yeah, you can have a blog, you don't see that kind of thing as much anymore. And so I don't want this to be depressing, but I think all of our transitions are sort of unique in particular ways. And it's more like, what can we tell you about those transitions that we made?
Well, and going back to your question about, do we regret sort of projects that we've left behind and things like that, I feel like the nature of digital is that it's going to be evolving and there will be new efforts that come along. And we, of anybody else, should be, are aware of that. But so I know that projects that I've done may start to break, and they may decide that it's not worth the effort to maintain that particular one, or it's no longer relevant to the direction that the museum is going. But that also doesn't take away from the fact that that project was there, it existed, it was there for that period of time, and we did it. And so, if I were still there, I'd be, itching to just pull the website apart and simplify it, streamline it, and redo it. So, I'm not going to, I'll be a little sad when I see the site that I worked on change radically. But on the other hand, if I were there, I would be doing the exact same thing. So, I think part of it is an acknowledgement of, we did these projects. Nobody can take away that happened, that we did those projects. And so what I'm probably regret more is leaving the people, because the people are the ones that really matter to me. And but on the other hand, you see them again. I see some of them here. So I think that's it can't be about regret. It has to be about appreciating the opportunities and experience that you had, and really being excited about what the next ones are for yourself, but also what the next ones are for the people who are still there, and the opportunities that they have to kind of pick up where you left off and even remake it. So.
If you're looking for a long-term legacy, you don't work in digital, do you?
Well, you have to retrain yourself, which is another issue that upper management often has no idea that we're constantly learning new things. Charlotte, when you said, you're in an organization, you want to work from home, and you want that, ability to mold your job in certain ways the way you want it. I just wanted to let you know, I too work for the Smithsonian, so I'm a federal employee, and the U.S. government. You might think the federal government has lots of pimples, but one of the things that they are involved in right now is something called phased retirement, where anybody who has worked 20 years in the federal government can work part-time as mentors.
Great.
That's really cool. Yeah, and so yay. Except the thing I think about is young people can mentor me, for God's sakes, So I have to pretend that I know a lot.
That's actually a really good segue for what I was going to say, and going off of what Allegra was saying, I think if it is depressing to some of us in the room, and I think it is, it's the loss of the leadership that the next kind of group of these professionals is losing. So have you all thought about that at all? And, going into some mentorship roles, I'm certainly trying to tap people. I've tapped Erin a lot. But have you thought about that as part of your practice?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, I'm a big advocate for coaching and mentoring. I think it's transformative. And, we've been talking about it around MCN and the potential for kind of setting something up through this organization and something slightly more formal maybe. But, we've done, we do it all the time. And I've, in both directions, I've looked for it and I've delivered it. And I think it's really empowering. And you're absolutely right. It gives a sense of continuity and a bit of exchange of wisdom back and forth.
I agree, but I think there's another issue here, which is there's a senior management responsibility around this. That they need to be recognizing that you have these emerging leaders, and we're not curators, we're not academics, we're not perhaps the traditional museum leaders. We're in a new emerging out of a new a new discipline really, and I think that there's been a lot of short-sightedness about what to do with people like us, and what kind of skills that we need to have to develop, because we're starting to see more the chief digital officer role, or the somebody sitting at the head table, but they're still few and far between, and so we're still under that. Even though we're having massive influence on the direction of the organization, we're not actually being promoted into that role where we're being seen to the rest of the organization as an influential leader. So I think there's a responsibility here around what kind of mentoring and professional development skills people at the level that we were at need to have to make that jump up. Is it that we're sent on MBAs? Is it that we need to go on leadership, high-level leadership courses? What is it? And so often, particularly in the UK, there's no money. There's no, you get confronted with, I'm really sorry, we can't send you on that, or there's some excuse. So I think that yes, we've all made a decision to leave, but I think the organization has to bear some responsibility for that as well.
But I also think that a lot of this case, people aren't gone, so the leadership is still in the field. And I know that when there have been points in my career where I felt like I wasn't getting the leadership opportunities or just challenged, and that's how I got involved in conferences, and that's how I got involved in like other kind of projects that so you have to find a way. And I think that that has done tons for me as far as like having other opportunities to, if your institution isn't giving you what you need, you have to find the way to get what you need any way possible. And I think that, as Charlotte mentioned, I'm really interested in MCN being having a more formal role in mentoring, because at just what you said, Jeff, too, we learn from our peers, whether we've been around, the mentor-mentee is always a flip thing, too. You learn different things from each other, and I think that would be a great way for us to even make these networks more. So if you want to work with me on it, give me your card and let's see what we can do. Because I think that we could really start something up and it would actually build some nice relationships in the community. Because the reality is that our institutions have a lot of things going on, have a lot of problems, or not a lot of problems, there's a lot of challenges. A lot of challenges. It's day 2 in the conference, not much sleep. And so I think that's what the real role is here. So one of the things that I try and protect is those travel budgets, because it makes such a big difference to be able to get with everyone here, and if we have some formalized mentoring and that could be further kind of defended, that would be great. So give me your card, help us.
And I'll just add to that, for me, success at the Met was when I could see in the digital media department that my staff was leading. I did not want to go to the Met as a change agent and have them think that it was all about me, that I was the person who was carrying that torch forward. So when I knew that it was time to leave was when I accomplished all the things I set out to accomplish, and I could stand back and see that there were people at a variety of different levels within digital media who had come up with initiatives, who had pitched them, who had executed them, and led them on their own. It wasn't me who did it. And that to me was success. And I think that we have a responsibility as managers to do more of that within our department, is really give people the opportunities to lead. And I have no regrets about leaving, because I knew that it was okay to leave. I knew that they would be fine. Sure. And it's a very successful program. I care deeply about all of them still, and I watch what they're doing. And they have done fantastic things in the last 2 years since I've left. And I'm so proud that they're still there and they're doing great work, and they're what?
And they're hiring my team.
And they're hiring Allegra's team, which actually is really, it's fantastic to see people going from MoMA to the Met. It's great. So, yeah.
There should be some kickback thing going on Erin, for that. So I just and now we should all be in on it to stay quiet. So I just wanted to congratulate you all on having the courage to do what you did. I did a similar thing and left the ivory tower to become a consultant, and I know how terrifying it was. It still is every day. But I wanted to urge you, I don't have a question, but I have homework for you, spiritual homework, in that for those of you who didn't get sucked back into the museum, if you're an independent consultant, I'm urging you, and when you jump back out, should you find yourself being an independent consultant, I urge you to consult not just with heritage institutions and museums, because everyone needs your insight. I'd love to see a level of humanities professionals appearing that leave institutions like museums and are consulting to nonprofits or even for-profit organizations who really need that kind of humanities insight, that understanding of people and visitors and the power of the arts and community. You have an insight that no one else really has, and you can blow minds with some white papers and make some cash.
Well, and that's exactly what my role is is about too. And it's been a good learning curve over the course of the summer, but it was one of my boss said, I really like the approach and the way you think about these things, and so I think that's what our role is to be with these for-profit companies and things, and helping them to think a little differently. And they're all focused now on this customer experience idea. Well, museums have been thinking about customer experience for a long time, and
Since
so
1702.
I think there are real opportunities there. But part of the idea of pulling this panel together was both seeing this seeming trend, but also an acknowledgement of we're not going anywhere. Even those of us who may seem like we're going somewhere, we're not going anywhere. And in an ideal world, we'd have sort of a complementary panel of the Nancys and the Scott Sayers who have gone from big institution to different institution, or from the consulting back into museum, because I think, it's about this evolution. And I think that's the message as well. I know that we're out of time, but just wanted to thank you all for coming, and hopefully we can, continue dialogues like this about, where the field is, where it's going, and how we all might work together, even those of us not technically in the field anymore. Thank you.